On Friday, the House of Representatives passed the STEM Jobs Act, which could offer green cards to foreign students with advanced degrees in science and math from U.S. colleges and universities. A win for the Republican Congress. Majority Leader Eric Cantor had this to say.
The bill that we passed will allow these individuals to have a green card if they get a diploma, and therefore enabling them to stay in this country, to begin their careers, to create jobs, rather than being forced to leave to go back to their home countries and actually compete with us.
For the Majority Leader, this is a bill that awards a certain kind of contribution to the American economy, and yet it effectively picks winners and losers when it comes to immigration. The STEM Act would offset visas for the highly educated by eliminating those from the Diversity Immigration Visa Program, half of which provide entry to the U.S. for applicants from African nations. Back to my panel. So, Tara, this language of Cantor saying, compete with us, and I'm like, oh, that's what the immigration fight is often about, the notion that some immigrants are bringing skills that we want to keep, like STEM, engineers and that sort of thing, and others are bringing skills that we don't want to compete in our labor market, particularly when we have a soft labor market like this. And so let's use our immigration policy to get the ones we want and keep out the ones that we don't.
Well, I think that, the whole notion that we're discussing this in the scope of immigration, specifically with DREAM and all these others, really speak to just the education portion of it. As we know, immigration is much more comprehensive. It's much broader. So I think he's, whether it's Achieve, whether it's DREAM, whether it's STEM, to that end, we're speaking about, those who are here getting educations, those who are, in military service and younger people. And so I think, look, at the end of the day, let me just back up a couple of seconds to the last segment, because I want to say I agree with Matt in that I'm a very optimistic person, but I'm not as optimistic as the others that we're really going to get anything done. First of all, the president has promised this since 2008. It was Democrats that actually really have been getting on his case, and Hispanics, as you saw in this past election, who really put his feet to the fire on this. And so, yes, at the end of the day, some conservatives and Republicans saw what was a political move by the president to say, all right, I'm going to do something, in August, right before the election. I would hope we do something, but it's the Republican position in a number of ways to handle this in kind of segments. And I agree with that. And I agree with that position because you almost have to. We haven't had immigration reform really since 1986 and Ronald Reagan, where it was amnesty, it was security, and it was enforcement. We've only done amnesty. Let's deal with. I think many conservatives and many Republicans say.
But I would just say that both Democrats and Republicans have pushed us off. So George W. Bush also during his 8 years in office didn't bring it. But so I agree with you. The president.
That's why I'm not that optimistic.
He tried a hell of a Here's why we are going to see immigration reform in 2013.
Doubtful.
The Achieve Act essentially is, by the way, the Achieve Act doesn't provide a path for citizenship, so it's basically the DREAM Act without the dream. It's proposed by two outgoing senators. The STEM Act is proposed by Lamar Smith, notoriously anti-immigrant. So when Lamar Smith is sponsoring an immigration reform bill, something has changed in the Republican Party. And when two outgoing senators are proposing their version of immigration reform,
I'm not saying we don't
something has changed in the Republican Party.
We have to have the discussion. We have to engage. But I think that, again, until we look at the first, it's almost three-pronged. Until we look at the enforcement and security issues, those issues, and then we can deal with the.
But the thing is, you don't have to deal with. I mean, you can create path to citizenship in pieces, so in stages, without dealing with all of that. Like to sort of say, well, we just can't do anything until we can do it all.
But we do that now in some sense. I mean, my sister-in-law, she's South African. She came here over 10 years ago. It took her 7 years to gain status, and this is after she had already been married, had kids. I mean, that is the legal path, and we have to start talking. I think Republicans want to start talking about putting back on the table how do we, enforce and enable and talk about encouraging legal immigration, and I think that's part of the discussion as well. It has to be.
Well, yes, it does have to be. But going back just for a moment to the STEM Act, all I have to say about that is no, 10,000 times no. Because
of the trade-off.
Yes, the STEM Act makes these trade-offs, sort of cherry-picking who we want. And I tell people, Ellis Island did not have a separate line for people who had master's degrees or PhDs. A lot of us would not be here if our government only chose the very best and the elite from other countries. That's not how our immigration system is organized. It's organized around family unity, and we have a random diversity lottery for a reason. That's one thing that makes this country great. But when we talk about comprehensive reform, what we hear again and again and again from Republicans, as you mentioned, is that we need to secure the border, enforce our immigration laws, and then we can get to the question of what are we going to do with the 11 million people who are already here. But the fact is, we have secured our border. The Pew Hispanic Center, the New York Times, the Migration Policy Institute all say that the inflows, illegal entries on the border are at an all-time low. The greatest drop
down
since
80% between 2000, right? Between 2004 and 2010.
We have had almost a Great Depression.
Oh yeah, I was going to say, and the main way we so-called secure our borders is market forces. I mean, the decline between 2004 and 2010 in people coming into the U.S. is because there are fewer economic opportunities.
That plus the wall has made it much more difficult for people.
But that's the second part of the equation.
And also,
we are enforcing
Mexico is a lot richer, even with the Civil War.
Right. So, comparatively, right. So I just want to be clear, right? It's the comparative markets between the two nations, and so.
But what we're also doing, getting the second step, the enforcement. We are doing that. That's why we have, for better or worse, these record deportations. The border is more militarized than ever before. So we have done those two steps. It's time to move on
to the final
This
step.
was the president's
legal status.
And I appreciate.
So the 1,000 deportations a day is a step that we needed to take.
Republicans want the enforcement.
I'm going to go with I'd like the 1,000 deportations to stop, and the question of STEM might be okay if it wasn't as a trade-off, right? If we were actually increasing the number, so one could create a new market force for generating, for example, engineers in the country. But the problem is it comes as a trade-off.
These are illegal immigrants. I mean, we still have to talk about the fact that we have.
But laws are social. So we just changed
immigration.
Well, but law isn't just a truth. The law is what we create, and so we can look at and change our law.
We can look at all these things at one time. It just doesn't have to be all bundled up in those same packages.
And they're screaming at me in the control room. Commercial, pay the bills. Thank you, Matt Welch, for coming in. I'm going to see you again next week. Everybody else is staying a little bit longer, and stay with us for the next hour. We're just going to go pay for the bills for a minute. When we come back, we're going to talk about the filibuster. I might even filibuster a little bit. I like to do that on this show. When you come back.